Tom, great to meet you. For our questions here today, the first question is, what do you see the state of the college generation in terms of faith?
Yeah, great question. I assume if we want to focus maybe on Asian Americans, the state of maybe Asian Americans is, maybe the whole population. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about the rise of the nuns and a very non-religious generation. As we think about Generation Z, probably more than half have no faith background at all or no religious background. In the Asian American space, I think generally, of course, less religious, less Christian background than previous generations. We're seeing a lot of students who have never heard the gospel before come on campus, never had an Asian church experience even, never been to an immigrant church, first generation church. If they've been to church, they've been to maybe a multi-ethnic or Caucasian church because they're second, third generation. So it is quite different than before. I think that's one thing that we need to realize is very different. One of the things that I would say is crucial for us to understand about the faith of this generation is they're very concerned about seeing the gospel be good news. So you can believe in it, but they don't really see it often be good news on campus. When they're on their campus, does it have any relevance to the issues of the day? Does it have any relevance to their studies? Does that have any relevance to the things that their friends are talking about? And when they need a Christian faith that's robust, that can engage those issues and even give them guidance on how to engage those issues. And so I think that's what they're really looking for and sometimes missing. Yeah.
That's good. Obviously, because of your job, you engage with a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of students. In today's world, it's very common for students to leave home and go to school in a completely new city. Often they don't even visit before they enroll. So for churches that, during the summers, during breaks when students come home, how can churches best support these students? And I guess maybe like local churches near college campuses who are receiving a lot of these students coming from out of town. I guess like for both of those kinds of churches, how can they best support our Asian American college students today?
Yeah, I mean, I think most importantly to recognize this generation is the most isolated generation ever. They're lonely, isolated, yet at the same time want friendship and community. They want to belong somewhere. And it's kind of a paradox, right? So they're feeling so lonely, yet they desire that community. And I think if churches can have that in mind, students want a home. They want a community. What I often tell folks is, if you can, when students are leaving your churches, commission them, like send them off. They're like missionaries. They're going to a hard place. They're going to be alone there. They're going to find different worldviews, and they need to be blessed and prayed for. So churches who are sending, to bless them and to commission them even. And then actually I think one of the responses I see churches have sometimes is to sort of coddle the students and protect them. But I would say this is an important time of life that churches can walk alongside and actually encourage them to engage the culture. Because when they're in college, it's actually a unique space and time where they can learn what it is to engage with different worldviews, if they're Christian, if they have that background, know what it's like to even argue or defend their faith. And then know what it's like to win someone towards the faith, right? And so I think if churches can actually encourage that cultural and campus engagement, encourage students to join a club on campus, right. Do things like that. So I think if churches can come alongside, that would serve students really well.
We couldn't have this conversation without, talking about Gen Z, without talking about social media.
Yeah.
So, especially in the last 2 years with the pandemic, everything going online and becoming hybrid, in your position, and just, I'm sure you've engaged with a lot of people and used social media yourself. How have you seen social media been an asset in the life of InterVarsity? And I know there's a lot of pitfalls with that, but if you could maybe just highlight some of the good things that have come about in the last couple of years.
Yeah, one of the new opportunities we see is that, and it's crucial, is that students, before they go to campus, they've already met people. So it used to be, before social media, it used to be you go on campus in the first week at school, you meet everybody.
Yeah.
Now, actually, and I have a daughter who's a senior in high school right now.
Okay.
So she's going to college next year. And in March, she already has tons of friends going to that same school that she doesn't know, but she met them on Instagram, right?
Got it, yeah.
So it's important if churches want to engage students before they come, get them connected to them on social media. If churches are sending students, encourage them, connect with people on the campus they're going to, or maybe a church nearby there, via Instagram or social media. So I think that's one piece that I would say is very crucial, is when you're thinking about outreach, don't wait for the physical outreach when they get to school, utilize social media. So that's a positive. I think another positive is delivering content, obviously. I mean, so for students who want to stay connected to their home church and what's going on, obviously utilizing that as a tool and sharing content, what's going on in the community. Now there is the flip side though, there's the danger, which is students will often have FOMO and actually miss their community so much that they have trouble detaching from that in attaching to a local campus church or campus community, right? And so we do want to encourage them, they've got to let go. And I find that's one of the big struggles with Gen Z is they're still connected to multiple communities, and so they can't fully be present on campus and to have an actual college student experience, you know?
Right, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned in our conversation some opportunities that exist now that didn't exist before. I'm just curious if there are any things in your experience in your current role or previous roles where I guess for me, like the social media component when I was in school was not a thing. We found out things through flyers and like announcements via email. So are there other things that even the local church can kind of be aware of and take advantage of to better support and walk alongside students, as you just mentioned?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, one change, but I don't know if it's positive or negative, but it's important to keep in mind is that you have more students who come from completely unchurched backgrounds. Sometimes that's a good thing. Without kind of church history, they're learning about Christ for the first time from scratch, so they don't carry any baggage.
Yeah.
So, but it does mean reorienting our evangelism strategies, or how do we share the gospel, because you can't assume someone has a church background. So that's a shift, right? Okay. Another thing about this generation is, again, I don't know if it's bad or good, but they're busier than ever and pragmatic, very pragmatic. So I would say don't assume that a student would be willing to take a 30-minute public transportation trip to your church, right? You've got to go to them. If you want to engage them, you've got to go to them, or encourage them to join in on-campus ministry, because I think they're so busy and they're wired in a way, they're so pragmatic. Unless there's some special thing that draws them, they're not going to do it. So you need to meet them where they're at, right? That's a great opportunity, though. I love it when churches if churches want to get involved in the campus ministry, I love it when they do it on campus, because that's exactly what we do in InterVarsity. Is we believe the best place to meet students is in their real life context. We don't want to pull them out from their reality and bring them somewhere that's not their daily reality. We want to meet them where they're at. So I do think that's an opportunity for churches as well.
I'm curious if you notice any regional differences, east-west, sort of north-south, in your experience in your current role, in terms of like unique challenges, and maybe how InterVarsity or you've seen local churches kind of respond to these challenges in these kind of localized areas.
Yeah, there are some. I mean, again, generalities, but certainly in the West and Northeast, you're dealing with much more post-Christian cultures, some places that are more hostile to Christianity, hostile towards what Christians believe, and so it is a battle. I think that those ministries tend to either fortify, they kind of are in defensive mode and try to either disappear, so like no one knows what they're doing, just so they hope no one notices and criticizes them, or they'll engage in hard issues, so in the area of human sexuality, how do you live out your faith in a way that honors the Lord when everyone on your campus believes something different, right? And being able to, so those ministries and those areas of the country, I see people either having to live counterculturally, you know, or they might be tempted to get sucked in and essentially adopt what the local culture has, right? So it's a struggle. I still see areas in the South today where it's still somewhat of a Christian culture, even though, again, people would say, oh, in Gen Z, the nuns are rising and everything. Still, generally, there are places in the South that are still, in the Midwest, that are still fairly friendly or at least welcoming and accepting of Christian ministries. And so in those places, often we're engaging with churched people versus in the West and Northeast, we're engaging unchurched people. So there's some differences like that as well.
Makes sense. You know, myself being in like the New York City context, there's a lot of students that are both from the East Coast, like the Northeast, but they all come from all over the place. And one thing I've noticed is that they're much sharper than I was when I was a student, and they have a lot of good questions, and they are growing up. And there was a talk earlier about how one of the panelists was talking about how students in today's generation, both youth and college, are growing up with the language of accountability and holding leaders to account, and that sort of being part of their inherent culture. Whereas for me, even you know, when I was in school, that wasn't necessarily a thing. So for anyone who has a heart for college students and wants to go into, you know, serving in InterVarsity or pursuing something in that area, how would you encourage them, or what would you kind of have them consider as they're you know, thinking about this calling, but also understanding sort of the climate and the culture that we're in today?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it'd be fantastic. I encourage lots of people to go into campus ministry. I think reaching college students is the most strategic area of life you could focus on, because students are making choices that determine the direction in their lives, right? Yeah, I think the accountability thing, you know, another way to put it is actually they're looking for people to actually live out what they believe or what they preach, right? And that's not a bad thing. We want pastors who preach something to live it out themselves in their lives, right? You know, maybe the difference is not only do they care about it more, they have tools to perhaps enforce it more, you know? They can find out things there, and then certainly information shared quite a bit. So going into any ministry, I would say, campus ministry included, I would encourage people to think carefully, because if it's a calling from the Lord, just remember you're entering a world where you will face criticism potentially, right? You get critiqued for a lot of things. I'm actually going to talk about that some more at this conference. But you'll get critiqued, so to be ready for that, have thick skin. But then don't see it as a bad thing. I mean, people will, they want to keep you accountable because they want to see Christ and they want to see Christians live out a life worthy of Christ, right? That's really what they want in the end. So yeah, but it's an issue we see today, and I don't think it's that difficult to have, you know, kind of overcome though. Right. And I hope that ministers are paying attention, people in ministry, that they do have accountability for themselves, that they have support structures for themselves, so that they don't kind of fall into traps that would get them into trouble. So,
right. Makes sense. I'm curious just personally, so for myself, I'm always learning new words and phrases from students, or just like the way they see the world sometimes is just so different from the way I see the world, and you know how my vernacular. So I'm curious for you. Obviously, InterVarsity is a large organization. There's many different branches. There's student leaders, there's staff. How do you keep your ear to the ground, like given your position, and understand and really like immerse yourself in the regional differences or the cultural differences that you see? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly simple. I spend time with them. You know, I think if you're a church leader and you want to know what's going on with college students, spend time with them. I visit students who are meeting together. I hang out with them. I take them out for meals. I get to know their lives. Then you hear the language, you know. And you'll find out things like, you know, a common language or common thing they talk about all the time is their anxiety and their fears. It's a fearful generation. You get all you have to do is hang out with them for a day, and you hear the trauma, the anxiety, the fears that they have, right? So I find it really helpful. So that's one thing I do, spending time directly with them, certainly. I also find social media does help. You get a sense of what they're talking about and what they care about. You know, you can go down rabbit holes too, so it's not always good. And then, you know, the age-old, there are things of this generation, but people are people, and so we
Right.
still need to remember that not every single person is going to fit the mold that you think. So again, we have to get to know each individual, and each student will have different struggles even. So we've got to spend that time.
One thing you just mentioned was the language and like prevalence of just being open about talking about mental health issues and anxiety. And even for me, I'm actually very shocked sometimes about how open students are about just telling me, oh yeah, I'm seeing a therapist, or I'm gonna go get counseling. And in a sense, it's a good thing that they're able to, especially as Asian Americans, because my church context is majority Asian American, for them to not have any shame about that and seeking out the help that they need. At the same time, it can lead to a sense of fragility and not a really strong sense of self and identity, even if someone's a Christian. So has there been anything in InterVarsity as an organization where, from a training standpoint, you sort of shifted the focus or just are emphasizing things now that you used to not emphasize as much in the past, or and like trying to get ahead of where you see the needs of this generation?
That's a great question. I think we attack it from both sides. So on one end, how do we come alongside students who are struggling with mental health, anxiety, fear? I think anyone in ministry to college students today needs to understand basics of mental health. 30 years ago, if someone had a mental health problem, we probably would have just referred them to a professional right away. Now you can't afford to do that because everyone pretty much struggles. So you need a baseline knowledge. So we do, in a way, train our staff or students. We talk about it in a way. You should know the basics of what to do. How do you talk to someone about their anxiety? You know, when do you pray for them? And you kind of, when is it a spiritual warfare? And you pray that it cast out. When is it just normal? You know. So we've got to have some baseline understanding of it. So I think that's one side, coming alongside them. And then of course in very serious cases like, hey, talk to your therapist about that. You know, I'll talk to you about different things. You keep working on that. On the other end, it can lead to paralysis, and that's a problem. So when we want to call students or encourage them to take risks for Jesus, right, or to do hard things, to go reach an unreached people group on the other side of the world, those are scary things. And if students are already scared, what does that mean? They're all going to say no because they're fragile, right? So I think we do need at the same time to challenge this generation in risk-taking and courage, perhaps, more than recent generations. They're so risk-averse. This is it's documented, a very risk-averse generation. So we're going to have to challenge. Following Jesus is inherently risky. It's inherently costly. It's inherently dangerous at times. So I think those are things that we also try to build into our discipleship. So I think those would be a few things.
Got it. I'm just curious if there's an anecdote or maybe a generality. And you mentioned, spending time with students, taking them out for meals, hearing, what they're talking about. If there's been like a moment or just a thought you've had about, wow, that really encouraged me. Like they don't even know that they ministered to me in that moment. And just maybe something, to share about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I could share. Maybe I'll share some real stories, so a negative and a positive. So I was at UT Austin, University of Texas Austin, a few months ago, and speaking to a group of students. They're Asian American students. I took them out for some Korean food afterwards. We had great. It was like 10 p.m. We had great Korean food together, and I'll forget. I said, "What are your challenges today?" And they said they were seniors. They said, "These younger students, no one wants to lead." I said, "Tell me more." They said, "Well, first of all, we had a pandemic, and so none of them have even really been led in person, so they don't really know how to lead. That's probably why." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that might be one reason why." And then I said, "Well, what else do you think?" And they said, "Well, they struggle with mental health and anxiety, and so they're really scared to lead, and so they prefer not to." Okay, good. What else? And they said, "Well, they're very busy and they're not always consistent in being able to participate in ministry, so they also can't lead, because they're too busy." And they just in that conversation, they gave me 3 things already, just in that food, that meal conversation. And even though they were lamenting, then I could thank those students who actually did have the courage to lead, and thank them for their leadership, even though they were paying costs themselves, right? But it gave me a window into the real life challenges today, right, in the student generation. So on the flip side, I'll say I was at Harvard's campus in February speaking to a group of students for a weekend. I was at the retreat, and we had a great time. And I was just so encouraged, these Harvard students, not too busy to take a weekend to worship the Lord together, about 70 Asian American students worshiping the Lord together. Several people were non-believers in the group. And as a result of the retreat, 2 of the students came to faith for the first time. They made a decision for Christ for the first time. And it was students who shared the gospel with their friends, you know. And so what I always tell people, no matter what the generation is, no matter what the challenges are, the gospel will go forth. Students, especially because they can speak the language of their generation, students will always be able to share the gospel with their fellow students, and God will always work in their hearts. And so even if people say, oh, they're so non-religious, they're this or that, they're mental health, whatever, people are still coming to Christ. And so we saw 2 people come to Christ there. And I actually asked them about their leadership, and they said, yeah, it was a hard year. We only had 8 leaders, and that's not a lot for a group of 70. And but then they said, but next year we have 20 new student leaders coming on. I was like, that's awesome, you know. And so there's always these bright spots, you know. God is at work, and I tell people, don't lose hope. There might be challenges in general, but God is still at work.
It's amazing. I'm not sure on time, but selfishly, I'm half Korean, half Chinese.
Okay.
And I think growing up, that wasn't like a very normal. I had never really met another half Korean, half Chinese person until like 2 years ago. And I think just with the demographic of the States moving in a certain direction, there's probably going to be more people that are like half this, half that, or third this, Asian, Filipino, Japanese, Korean, Chinese. With that sort of in mind, what makes you excited about the future of like young people in the States, especially Asian Americans, who have these multiple, I guess, like ethnic identities? And the reason why I'm asking this question is, you know, as an Asian American, if you're a Korean American, for example, you have certain, at this conference they talked about like the challenges that brings operating in a majority white culture, and then trying to be white, but then also trying to be Korean in other cultures and settings. For me, I felt like that, but like times 2, because it's like, okay, the Koreans see me as Chinese see me as like Korean, but I'm American and I grew up here. So there's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of cool opportunities, and just being able, I'm reminded of that verse, I can't remember where Paul talks about trying to become everything, right, for the sake of Christ. And when you are not just ethnically, but just where you're from, and moving to a new city, you're able to kind of be more relatable, or just like relate to more kinds of people. So yeah, if there's anything in the next 10 to 20 years that you're super excited about for the future of like the Asian American generation in the States, I'd be curious.
Well, great question. So my daughters are half Chinese, half Korean also, and this generation will see many more multiracial or biracial people, and it's wonderful. And we're seeing that in our Asian American ministries across the country right now. The fellowship I talked to you about at UT Austin and at Harvard, all sorts of different Asian Americans. Some that are multiracial, some that are Korean American, some that are Chinese, Taiwanese American, South Asian, Southeast Asian. What's exciting is actually I think there's a huge opportunity in Southeast Asian ministry, growth, significant growth opportunity. I think there's a significant growth opportunity for the biracial, multiracial as well, because folks like you or people who are kind of in between, like they need a home as well, right? So really excited about the potential for that. I don't think it'll be, actually I think more and more terms like first generation, second generation, those will be less used. It'll be more multiracial kind of conversations. It's exciting because I do think what the church needs today in its witness, and how we need to engage the culture today, is to cross cultures even more, right? And so people who have a multiracial background, they've been living in multiple cultures all their lives, and they're well equipped for it. So I'm excited about that. I think they're well equipped to engage first, second, third generation folks, you know, people of multiple races. I mean, so I think that's a great opportunity. Not easy, but it's a great opportunity. So yeah, those are a few thoughts.
Thank you.